In this video, what we're going to be doing is building my ultimate home media server. We are going to be setting up the R stack of applications. We're going to be setting up a media server, mostly Jellyfin, but we'll cover Plex as well. And then we're going to talk about some companion applications for the actual media streaming services. The R stack is going to include everything from a VPN, torrent client, NZB client, Sonarr, Radarr, LiDAR. It's going to be beautiful. And I will note and I will encourage the primary use case for those R applications is going to be media organization. They have many other use cases as well, but I'm not going to be able to specifically dive into every single little thing in this video because I don't want to get cooked. But if you want more context and information after everything's set up through this video, you could check out the Servarr wiki to learn a lot more. And this guide is going to work whether if you're going to be doing this in Proxmox, which is what I'm going to be doing. This actually is the part 2 of my ultimate server build Proxmox series full walkthrough guides. Or you can use the timestamps down below to skip around. So if you're doing this just on like a basic Ubuntu server, you can skip around to that Docker Compose section, so on and so forth. So going into the fact that this is part 2, I do need to give you a little disclaimer. I actually did a lot in between part 1 and part 2. By that, I mean I switched my hardware around. So there were some very slight changes in my setup, but nothing significant. If you followed the last video, you're going to be able to follow this one completely fine. I put this in a more powerful server with more hard drive bays. So one thing you'll notice is if I go down to disks here, I do have some more hard drives as well as some more NVMe SSDs. I set up the data directory completely the same, except for you'll notice that it is slightly larger. Also for the flash right here, instead of setting up a disks storage thing as a directory, I just added the flash directly to storage. But if you still have disks, just use that instead of flash. I didn't do too much different. So the very first part of this guide is going to be setting up a Ubuntu server with Docker. We already have our vault here, which this is our kind of main base canvas of what we're going to be using for our shares and whatnot. This is going to be the manager of all the .raw files, which are the virtual hard drives that we're going to be using. And if I go over here to resources, we can see we have that first mount point 0, which is that massive data directory that we created. A difference, instead of the root disk being on the disks, it's on flash. So that's the main difference. Now, the first thing I want to do, and this is completely optional, you can go ahead and put all your Docker configurations within the container that you create for your Docker server. I want them to be on a share managed from Vault. So this is some extra steps that I'm doing for my personal setup, and it's going to be pretty simple. First, I'm going to go ahead and shut down the Vault because I want Docker, the Docker share to be managed through this. So I'm going to go ahead and let this shut down, and then all we're going to do is simply add a new mount point. The storage for this I'm going to put as flash. You can see it's a ZFS pool instead of the directory which disks is in. If you're still using disks, again, use that. Doesn't really make a big difference. But here I'm going to select flash. I'm going to give it a good amount of storage. Again, this is just Docker configurations. I am going to give it a good amount just in case if I want to put databases in here or something like that. And then for the path, this is the actual mount point on this container. And this is the mount point that I'm going to use in the actual Docker container as well, which is /Docker right in the root. I'm doing the same thing for /data, having the same kind of directory schemes throughout various containers, shares, and all that really makes it easier in the future, especially when we have other services moving things around between directories. So in the future, you're going to see that when I bind mount the configurations, it's going to be Docker to wherever the container wants the configuration file to be, and then it's going to be data. Real simple. I'm going to keep this in backup for now, and then we're going to go ahead and create that. So now we have the new mount point in Docker. Now, real quick, if I just go ahead and start this up, I'm going to go ahead and actually create that Docker share just so I can access it in the future. Again, this step is completely optional. 10.0.0. 55. There we go. So now if I go over to my navigator, we should have the Docker folder right here that we just went ahead and mounted to this. So I could go over to file sharing, and then under shares, I'm just going to quickly add that. This is going to be Docker configurations, and the share path is going to be that Docker folder. Like last time, Mac support, edit permissions, give group right. Group is going to be data share, owner is going to be me, apply that, and that should be good. So I'm going to hit confirm. And now we have that Docker share right there. So now we're back in Proxmox. We're going to actually create our container now. So to do this, let's go ahead and click on create container. This is going to be, what should I call it? I gotta be creative. This is really only going to be for my VPN and R stuff, so I'm going to call this Servarr for the host name. Give it a password. We're going to keep it as an unprivileged container. That's just kind of a general recommendation if you're doing Docker on Proxmox like this. There will be some things that we're going to have to do to get like the tunneling for the VPN client to work, but we'll cover all that. So we'll go next. For template, I'm going to select the Ubuntu 22.04 that we downloaded in the previous video. So click on that, and if you're watching this video to start with, it's under local container templates and you can download it through there. So let's go next. For disks, I'm going to go ahead and throw this into our flash or your disks folder. This actual container isn't going to really need that much room because all the configuration files and everything are going to be stored within that Docker folder, which again is a share managed by our vault. So I'm going to go ahead and continue. CPU cores, let's give it a little bit more to work with. So next, memory, I'm going to pump this up to 248. Doesn't require that much RAM. Keeping swap the same. Let's go next here. DHCP is what I select because I like to manage everything with my Omada kind of router interface. So let's go next. DNS, keep that the same and confirm it. So let's hit finish there. And then it's going to create. So let's close this dialog, and we briefly covered this part in the last video, and that's adding these. So if I go over here to resources, we have the data and flash. I want to add these mount points, these specific raw files into Servarr. To do this, what we're going to want to do is head over to Proxmox, and we're going to want to go over to the shell for Proxmox, and then navigate to the directory that these LXC configurations are stored. The LXCs are these containers here. Hit enter, ls. We can see here we have 100 conf and 101 conf. Now if I just cat command the 100, we can see the mount points right here. So we mount point 0, which is data, and mount point 1, which is flash. I'm just going to copy these lines right here. So right click, give that a copy. And now instead of cat or using the cat command, I'm going to use nano, which is our text editor. And I'm going to dive into the 101 configuration here. So then right above net, we are going to add these new mount points, mount point 0 and 1. So it's going to access data, that raw disk, in the exact same mount point, exact same size, as well as within flash, our Docker configurations in the exact same directory here, exact same size. We are going to need to jump into this file one more time, but just to kind of keep everything in the same order for now, or in the proper order, I'm going to save that, exit out. Now if I go over here to Servarr, and then we go over to resources, you can see these new mount points right here. So then if I fire it up, start it, and then head over to the console, log on in, and if I cd into the root directory and ls, we can now see we have Docker and data here. So now when it at least comes to the file directories, everything's set up. So now let's do some like super basic things that you need to do every time you create a new Ubuntu or really any Linux server. And that is we don't need to run sudo, we're still root, apt update, as well as an apt upgrade. And might as well throw this in here. Let's install curl. So apt install curl, just like that. We're going to need that to get the Docker convenience script that we're about to go ahead and grab. So here we go. Let's go ahead and install all of those updates in curl, and we'll proceed with that installation. And there we go. Sweet deal. So now what I'm going to do, and this is moderately important, we are going to create a new user. Add user. Call it whatever you want. I am indeed Brandon. So there we go. Give ourselves a new password. I generally fill in the full name, but nothing else here is really important unless if you're a giant organization. Information is correct, yes. And then from there, I'm going to add add a user, the user I just created, to the sudo group, just like that. So now I should be able to do an SU, which is switch users, to Brandon, ls, or actually let's cd. Did it automatically create a home for me? Oh, it did. Print working directory. Sweet. Now this is where I would, if I didn't do the whole Docker share thing in this Docker root folder here, this is honestly where I would create all my Docker configurations. I'd create a folder within my home directory and then subfolders for all the various containers. So that is a really good way to go about it if you don't want to do all the extra BS that I'm trying to do. Speaking of Docker, probably the easiest way to install it is with their convenience script right here. So first we're going to curl their actual sh file. It's best practice, especially if you don't know where the sh file is coming from, is go ahead and go through it and review it, but this is from Docker themselves, so I indeed trust it. So from there, I'm going to run this as a sudo user, sudo, and then sh, and then the git docker sh. Type in my root password so everything can install, and there we go, it is now installed. Now, one thing that is kind of a good thing to do real quick is I want my Brandon user to be able to run Docker commands without having to type sudo every time. This is a nice little article by a organization called TechHut Media. Do recommend you check it out. It is the 7 Docker Basics for Beginners. If you're not familiar with Docker, this is a good video and resource to kind of use. Has a lot of the stuff that we're going to do. We have the managing Docker as non-root user. The convenient script automatically adds that for us. So all we're going to do is paste in this user mod command. I'm adding my current user to that Docker group. And then I'm doing new group Docker to actually load that, so then I can run Docker without sudo. Oh, whoop. Up, just like that. So now, if you are familiar with Docker and you prefer just to do everything in the terminal, you can skip this step, but I like to use Portainer, something I just learned how to say properly. So here is the Portainer documentation. All we need to do is copy this right here to create the Portainer data volume, drop that in, and you can see it didn't make me type in sudo, which is great. And then right here, this is the actual run command for Portainer. I'm going to drop that in. Basically, if you're not familiar with Docker, again, please check out the other resources, but this is going to be on the port 9443 for HTTPS with the name Portainer. Restart always, it has access to the Docker sock. It's going to be using the Portainer data volume we just created, and it's going to pull the latest community edition. So let's hit enter and let it do that. We'll take it just a second, depending on your internet speeds. So there we go, we're rocking and rolling. Now this chapter of the video is going to be some prerequisites to make sure the stack works. We're going to set up some things real quick. Let's see first if I have permissions. So let's cd into data, ls. Can I touch it? Test.txt ls. Wonderful. So I shouldn't run into permission issues. If we go over here to my GitHub page for everything that we're going to be doing, I put in as much information as I could with how I have the directory set up and any network shares if you want to use those instead, user permissions, things you may need to run to fix any issues, as well as a lot of the VPN information here. So this is going to be a very useful tool, and I'm constantly going to be updating it and trying to make it as good as I possibly can. And one thing that I want to do is create our folders that we're going to be using. So if I go down here, I made a nice little convenient command. Where did it go? Ah, there it is. So for our data structure, the main thing we're going to be focusing on right now is downloads here. We're going to be using 2 tools. We have qBittorrent and nzbgit. And here I have it kind of set up like this. You could really actually set this up however you want to, but again, this is my server setup walkthrough. So I'm going to copy this command, which will create all of this for us here. So if I go over, I'm in data. If I paste in this command, it's going to make the directory of downloads, qBittorrent, and all those subfolders, as well as make the directory for nzbgit and all of those subfolders. So if I hit enter, and then ls, we now have that date or downloads folder. So if I go in there, you can see that everything is looking as it should, at least for how I like to set it up. Now, while I'm in here, I'm going to go back to data, and I am going to make folders for our movies as well as our shows. And I might as well make the directory for music as well. So now it's beginning to look a lot more like how I have it set up. I'm going to remove this test.txt file here. Looking good. And now what we want to do is make it so the actual VPN client. We're going to be using Gluetun for our VPN client with WireGuard. And since it's an unprivileged container, there is a slight little modification that we're going to need to make within our actual LXC configuration. So we're going to head over back to Proxmox, and I should be able to go up, go to the right directory, and then go into the configuration file for Servarr, which is where we're installing all of this. And then if I head back over to my GitHub page and go down to the Gluetun Proxmox fix, I'm going to grab this right here. This is basically going to allow this unprivileged container to access the device for the network tunnel. So I'm going to copy that and drop it on in. I usually just drop it right under net. Again, I don't think the order matters, but I don't know. It's worked for me last time. So I'm going to output that, exit, And let's restart this virtual machine since I just did a configuration edit. I should have stopped it first. Let's make sure that the configuration that I just did is still there, which it is. It did move it down. That's okay. So now that those were kind of some of our little prerequisites we needed to do before we could fire up the Docker Compose file. So now we can just log into Portainer. So the IP address, IPA is the command I just ran to see just about everything. This right here, 51, is going to be the IP for Servarr going forward. So I'm going to copy this. And for Portainer, it's going to be HTTPS, the server IP address ending in 9443. So hit enter, advanced, continue, and here we go. So just set this up with whatever user credentials you would prefer to have. I got to make it stronger. So let's create our user, and it drops us right in. From there, we could go ahead and just click on getting started, live connect to our instance, and then under containers, we could see we only have the one Portainer container running. Let's make this a little bit bigger so you can see what's going on. And we're going to go over to stacks and add a stack. Now here is where you're going to want to have some fun, if you could call it fun. And that is right here. I do have various stacks within this media folder on GitHub. I have my R Compose, Jelly Compose, and Plex Compose. Right now, we're going to be focusing on R Compose. This is going to have a variety of things, including Gluetun, the VPN client. We have a QBitTorrent here, which is going to be the torrent client. We have NZBGit. Whoa, get out of there. Yeah, this works. NZBGit, Prowlarr, which is the tool that is actually going to go and find content if you do choose to set that up on your own regard. Sonarr, which is our organizational tool for movies. Radarr, our organizational tool for movies. Lidarr, our organizational tool for music. Bazaar, which handles subtitles. Radarr, which handles books, and I'm probably not going to set this one up. So really, I'm going to copy all of this and paste it in. Pop. Now here, probably the most difficult thing to configure at first is going to be the actual VPN client here, because you have to actually have a VPS service that works with this. I am personally using AirVPN at the moment. I've found it to be very nice. No, they're not sponsoring the channel, but if you do use my link, I get a slight commission, so that's cool. I've never reached out to them. They've never reached out to me. Anybody can get a referral link if you want one, but probably your best resource to setting this up, other than the video I created specifically on this, so I'm not going to go into too deep of a detail right now of exactly how to set this up, because I do have a whole separate video on it. If we head over to their GitHub page here, go to the wiki. Here it is. Right here under table of contents, you have providers, and these are all the different providers that it supports. If you go into a specific provider, such as AirVPN, for example, it goes over the information that you are going to want to actually set this up. For me, WireGuard is going to be my case. And if you go down, it does kind of it gives you information on how to get your client key, get your certificate keys, and everything that you need to fire this up. You can see here the required environmental variables for WireGuard is the type, the private key, the pre-share key, and the WireGuard address. And then you have some additional things if you want to pick a specific country, region, city, so on and so forth. And again, my other video goes into substantially more details, but just using this for whatever service you pick should be good enough. Another really popular one, for example, is private internet access here. They prefer you use OpenVPN for this one, or if you're a fan of like NordVPN, for example, if I go here, you can see the options that you're going to want to pick with all the environmental variables, and there are links to help you get some of this information. So for me, for AirVPN, again, I go ahead and put in the various keys, the address. One thing that I need to get this working right is the firewall VPN input ports. And that is a pretty easy thing to go ahead and get. Like if I sign in here, go to the client area, you have your configuration generator here. So that's where you would get all your keys. And then you have your ports here. So if I click manage, this is the port that I would use. Additionally, how this is kind of working is it's passing through the ports through this container. So some of the actual containers I do want behind a VPN, such as Pt.2, NZBGet, Prowlarr, I put their ports here under the Gluetun container. You can see I already have all that set up there. And then if I go down, for example, here, I don't actually have a port listed because the VPN client is going to go ahead and manage that for us. Additionally, I had cap add net admin, so it has those privileges as well as direct access to the dev net tunnel device. This is specific to Proxmox. You might not need this, but if you run into any issues, adding this may help. Then for volumes, I have Docker Gluetun to Gluetun, and then I do have a health check in this one. And the kind of methodology goes throughout the rest of these. For environmental variables, I have 1000 and 1000, which 1000 is my user ID, and 1000 here happens to be the ID for the data share group that we created earlier in the cockpit. And if you have any issues with permissions or anything like that, if you go down to user permissions, I go through basically my kind of thought process, how to see your permissions, and if you do run into any issues with files being able to move around or download, commands that you could use to fix things. And then of course I have data, so you may want to change this to where your actual data folder is going to be. And then it follows the same thing, Docker NZBGet, data. For Prowlarr, they don't need files. Sonarr, we have local time, Docker in Sonarr. That's their config, data. So I just kind of follow that all the way down here. So what I'm going to do real quick is actually input this information and then go ahead and fire up the container. So there we go. I pasted in my information. I'm using a Vancouver, Canada server because it's relatively close to me. So once you go through all this and you verify everything looks correct, I should probably change a password real fast. There it is. User. There we go. So once everything looks good, it's at this point that we can finally, I need to give the container a name. What should we name it? Probably just Servarr. Now we can finally hit deploy the stack. Now this, if something's going to go wrong, now is the time. It takes a minute because it has to, oh, yes. Huh, beautiful. Containers. Now you can see everything cooking and going. One other thing I probably should have mentioned is the devices that are actually going to be using the VPN have a network mode service Gluetun. But let's head over to containers real quick. We can see everything's running. And the first thing that we want to do to check this is go over to the logs for Gluetun by clicking on that. And we can see right here, we are connected to Vancouver, British Columbia. So it's working for me. Beautiful. And one thing that we could do also that I kind of recommend to test it, if we go over here, we have VPN information, lots of fun information on exactly everything I just explained and kind of how it's working there. But if we go testing other containers, we can go ahead, copy this command. Let's go to our Proxmox machine, paste this in, and we are going to execute into, let's do the Pt.2. So Qtorrent container. There we go. And then if you just run this wget with the ipinfo.io, copy that, you can test to see where this is pulling its internet connection from, which we can see it is Vancouver, British Columbia. Woohoo! I'm excited because it took me quite a bit of configuration tinkering to be able to get that to work just on the first go. So now with all of our containers running, the real thing that we have to do now is actually set everything up. And the first thing that we are going to set up and make sure works is that torrent client. So Pt.2 here, and I believe it's on the port 8080. So if I grab this same IP here and then go to the port 8080, here we go. Now, one thing with this is it does provide a randomly generated password at the get-go. So we're going to jump into the logs for Pt.2, and then down here is my randomly generated password. So copy that. Username from the get-go is admin, and then paste in that password, and we're in. So let's go to tools and go to options here. Where do I change my password? Ah, there it is. So Brandon, and is this going to be, okay, good. Change my password, save that. So now what we need to do is set up the kind of directory scheme that I have going on. So to do that, we're going to go over to options. This log file is fine. Right here under downloads, /downloads is not our path. It's actually going to be /data since we have that entire directory exposed. And I'm going to save some time here. So this right here is our download directory, the completed one. So copy that, drop it on in here. So paste, And now I have an incomplete and a torrent files. So just to remind myself, it's incomplete in torrents. So I can go like this, paste that in, incomplete, and then this one is going to be in torrents, just like that. So those are my download directories for the BitTorrent client. Let's save that. And now we're going to do a couple quick tests. First thing, right here, this site, what's my IP? I'm going to right click on this magnet link here and copy that. Click right here to add a new magnet link. Let's make sure that at least through them, they're also seeing that I'm using that Canadian server. So it's queued. And then right there, it is indeed, I recognize it, that is that Canadian server. So that's kind of how you check to make sure it doesn't match up with your current IP address there. And then to make sure that there's no like issues with permissions and whatnot, to actually make sure a download is going to work, I'm going to grab this Ubuntu torrent. So let's copy that link and then drop this in here. You can see the save file location. You can customize these as you see fit, but let's hit download and see if there's any issues at all. And it's downloading. There we go. At fairly decent breakneck speeds too. So if we go back to Proxmox here and I cd into incomplete ls, you can see that torrent file, or not the torrent file, the Ubuntu ISO file there, a free and open source torrent. God damn, 6 gigabytes is pretty crazy for a Linux distribution. And then when that's done, it should go ahead and automatically move over to the complete file or folder, and we're good to go. And really, just for giggles, we're actually on a Windows machine here. If I head over to Vault, we can see both data and Docker, the folder we created there. Hopefully this works. Haha! We can see it created all those configuration folders when we spun up the stack. And if I go back to data, go to downloads, qubit torrent, incomplete, we can see it right there. And it's just about finishing up here, so it should automatically move over for us. So there we go, we saw it disappear from here, it's now seeding, and if we go to completed, there it is. So it's working. Nice. I've re-recorded this video twice. I'll go ahead and keep it all seeding because everybody needs a nice Ubuntu desktop. So now, back to containers, our next one is going to be nzb-git. Now for this, I'm not going to get into getting news servers and things like that. You got to really be picky and find the right one that only has free and open source stuff. So, and that's hard to find, so I'm not really going to get into that. So torrent client's done, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now I set this up in the Docker Compose. So there we go, got it. Now here, under settings, bunch of fun stuff. We have status, system, the web interface information, our paths. This is what we're going to focus on here. Basically the exact same process that we did within qubit torrent. So here in Proxmox, I'm going to cd back out to data, downloads, nzb-git, print the working directory. So here is our root folder. So copy this, not paste it. We want to copy this. And they make this a little bit easier. So right here, main directory is going to be that nzb-git. And then from there, you have the main directory, completed, intermediate, nzb, q, and temp. If I ls, we have completed, intermediate, nzb, q, and temp, all already created for us. So going back over here, that looks good. So I'm going to scroll all the way down, save all the changes, and then I'm going to reload nzb-git, and there we go. So now if I go over to settings, to actually get this to work properly, you're going to have to set up a news server here as well. For that, Reddit is going to be your friend. And with everything, do be careful what you download and all that. So now we get to have a little bit more fun. Let's set up the R stuff. We have Prowlarr. I'm not going to go into all of them. They all kind of have the same setup process. And actually, I should probably move some actual of my media into those folders real quick, just so you can see and we have some stuff to work with. So this is going to be a tutorial within a tutorial. I'm going to add my current Unraid instance. So if I go over to my data center here and under storage, add, I'm going to add a SMB share here. This is just going to be Unraid. This is temporary. I'm going to end up removing this. Unraid, the server is at this IP address. Put in your login credentials. And hopefully, if everything works right, it's going to be able to scan it and see it. So data is the folder that I want. I'm going to enable it. This is going to be a disk image. And I don't think I need to pick a domain or subdirectory. I'm just going to click on add. And there we go. We have the disk image. It's put into the mount PVE unraid. And we can see it populate right here. Let's head over to Proxmox here in our shell and make sure that it's showing up right. So let's go to mount, PVE, and we have unraid here. So if I cd into unraid, run an ls, we could see everything there. So I should be able to just mount this directly into my container. If I go to the configurations, nano into our vault configuration, we'll do this as a mount point 2, paste in that, which is the directory. Mount point, I'll have that equal to unraid, just like this, and that should work. Output that, and then let's reboot it. Reboot the vault, it's right there, reboot. And then once it reboots, log in, see if the unraid mount is there, and if I ls, everything's there. Absolutely beautiful. Remind myself of this IP address, it's the 55. I'm gonna try doing this through Cockpit itself. That would be nice. So within the navigator, I should have an unraid folder in here. So if I go up a directory, we have unraid. So I'm gonna go in here, I'm gonna grab a movie. Let's grab A Bug's Life. Let's give that a copy. And then if we go up to data movies and then paste that in here, hopefully it works. When I actually move the entire collection I have, I'm just going to use the rsync command with progress so I can see it, because it's a lot of files. I do wish this navigator would show progress. That would be, oh, there it is, cool. And paste. And while that pastes, just to check real quick, I'm going to go into my data folder through my actual client here. Movies, A Bug's Life, play it. Oh, beautiful. Oh, beautiful. So now that I have some example content, we can finally go ahead and set up or get some of these R applications talking with each other, and so everything works right. So if I go to 9696, hit enter, you can see it's set up. The first thing we're gonna have to do is set up our authentication. I like to use a login page personally. That of course is at your discretion. I'm gonna save this, and there we go. So under system, we have no indexers. So you're going to want to add an indexer. Make sure when you do add one, it is something from completely free and open source content. Or if you're only using it specifically for media management, you honestly don't really need to set up Prowlarr, but if you don't set it up, you may get some ignorable errors within Sonarr and Radarr, etc. And I did go ahead and add an indexer just to get rid of that error for me. And I believe one thing we're going to have to do is over here under settings, we have apps. This is where we're going to set up the other applications. So we're going to jump into Radarr, which is the port 8989, just like this. And when you first start all these, you're going to have to set up your authentication method every single time. So save that, and there we go. So one thing you're going to notice is we do have some system errors over here. So no indexers, no download client. So first things first is we're going to get these indexer errors to go away. So I'm going to go over to settings, and we are going to want my key. So I think it's under general. There it is, my API key. So I'm going to give that a copy. We're going to need it over here for applications. We're going to set up an app. This is going to be Sonarr. So for this, you can paste in your API key. Now these are all within the same Docker Compose file, so it might work if we just test it. It is not. So there's a couple things that might work for you. I do recommend you try to use either the local Docker IP address or the actual host name might work. So for example, Sonarr, test that. Nope. So I'm going to grab the IP address of this kind of stack of containers here. So we could see all these containers are on 18 except for NZBGet. So I'm going to grab this. This is their IP address, and then drop that on in and end it in .1, and then do the same thing over here with Prowlarr 1, test it. There we go. Now they can talk to each other. If this doesn't work for you, or you have issues, you may have to use the actual network local IP address, which for me would be the 10.0.0.51. So save that. So now Sonarr is there set to full sync. So if I go over here under system, you can see those errors disappear. So now for download clients, if I go over to settings, and then we want our download clients, I'm going to add a new client, and here we have a few different options. I went with qubit torrent. So here for the host, I'm going to paste in that same local IP address. It's in the port 8080, and then we're going to want to put in our login information, and then let's test this real quick. I might need to fix the categories right here. If you're using a different client, I think it's Divulge, can't say it right. If you're using the one I previously used in that dedicated VPN video, you're going to have to enable the category plugin, but it doesn't look like we need to here. So let's hit save, and there we go. We have qubit torrent. And if we want to, we should be able to do the exact same thing with nzbgit. So again, using that same local IP, add your username and password. This one, if I test it, you can see this category doesn't exist. Fix this, we can head over to nzbgit, go to settings, right here under categories. Here are the various categories by default. We have series, movies, etc. So I'm just going to use what they already have set up for us. So if I add series, hit test, category exists. So now I can hit save. So there we go. We added our download clients. We have Prowlarr working properly. And I'm not going to actually dive into Radarr. It's the movie one. It's literally the exact same process. But if I go over here to activity, you can see the queue's empty, nothing's going on. I do already have media, so we're going to want to import that data. So if I go over to series and then import existing series, start the import. And for here, we are going to select the data directory and then shows. And don't click on the show, but from here, hit OK. So then it scans that entire folder. You can see right here, it found it, the Adventures of Jimmy Neutron. Select the right one. Here you could change your quality profiles and things like that, but I'm just going to hit import one series, and then it will work. If I refresh this, you can see it right there. It's going to populate that picture any moment. And there we go. So the Adventures of Jimmy Neutron. And now this is cool because I can see that I have all of the episodes. So if I was like, had a series folder that I like ripped from a DVD or whatever, and for some reason one episode didn't actually import properly, I can see what episode I'm missing. And if all your names are scattered and you have a really weird naming scheme, you could do renaming here, but I need to actually enable that. So let's go settings. I think it's media management, episode renaming. So we're going to enable episode renaming, and then you can customize and configure this however you want to. So by default, we have the series title, season and episode title, and then quality. So I would hit save changes here, go back to series, go to Jimmy Neutron, preview rename. It's already in that format, so it's not going to actually give me a suggestion on renaming the files. So yeah, that's how you set up the R applications and get them all to communicate with each other. The process, again, is basically the same with Radarr and LiDAR, which LiDAR is for music. One tool that I find very helpful is having local subtitles, and that is over here. That is Bazaar. I'm not going to go to a full dedicated tutorial on this and how to use all the features and everything, but just to ensure that it's able to connect with it. If I go down to languages, we have our language settings here. Providers is where it's actually going to pull from. So like if I go providers, the general default that most people go with is opensubtitles.com. OpenSubtitles.org works really good if you want to give them a little bit of money and then download a whole bunch at once. But .com, I think this is my credentials, so I would just add that, and then right here we save that. And then for like subtitles, for example, you have settings on how you want that to work. For Sonarr, I would enable that, pop in the API key, and then let's test it out. And it's not working because this is actually going to be 18. So now let's go ahead and click that again. This one's not liking that, so let's try this one. So click that again. There we go. So it's able to read it with that. You have options for minimal score. Again, I'm not going to dive into absolutely everything. There's a lot to cover here. This application deserves its own entirely separate video. If I go down to system, we can see some announcements. But if I scroll up, let's make sure that's saved. Here, since I did save it, it added a series now. And you could see we have one series. So I could go and click through here and see the available subtitles and all that. And here is where you could go and actually search through and find them. But again, that's just the simple process of how to get it connected with the other tools. So now I think it is finally time to go ahead and set up our actual media servers. For my use case, there are three main options, and all three are great. They have their own pros and cons. You have Plex, which is kind of the main commercial one. It's my personal one that I use more than anything. Then we have Jellyfin, which is, it's better, it's completely free and open source, but the only reason I use Plex over it is because it's easier for like my family to connect to it remotely, and it's available on more actual like streaming devices. I'm going to work on a fix for the first problem myself, and Jellyfin is doing really good about getting on more and more devices, so hopefully eventually I'll be able to completely phase out Plex for Jellyfin. But another reason why I like Plex more is because it has a lot more third-party tools such as a Truly and stuff like that. Granted, Jellyfin is getting more and more as time goes on. Now, an important thing to know is if you're going to want hardware transcoding or not. This has a Intel CPU in it, which is absolutely phenomenal for hardware transcoding. Transcoding adds features like being able to downsize a video on the fly. So if it's a 4K video and you want it to stream at 720p, that's one use case. Or if you have a really weird media format that the actual client device or streaming device doesn't support, local hardware transcoding on your server is going to be your friend. With Plex, it's a paid feature. With Jellyfin, it's completely free and open source. For this video, the example that I'm going to use is going to be Jellyfin, primarily due to its free and open source nature. And when it comes to the actual whole process, it is almost identical because we are going to be using this, a Proxmox VE helper script. What this is going to do is allow us to set up everything super easy. If we go down here to media and we go to the Jellyfin media server, you can see this as the option for privileged or unprivileged hardware acceleration support. We're going to want privileged hardware acceleration support just so we could have that transcoding. And if you don't use this, it is kind of an involved process to actually mess with the configuration and get all that set up. This will add all the variables and everything for us within the LXCE configuration file. And it truly is a simple process. One thing I will note is right here, this is the SH script. We are running a script. So it's always fun to go ahead and check those out. These are some of the default options. It's going to actually curl in, if I can grab it, this script right here. So if you're interested in everything that it's going to be doing, you can go ahead and skim through this if need be. Now, to do this, all we want to do is give this a quick little copy here and then jump on over to our Proxmox right here under the shell, and then simply paste it on in. So hit enter, and I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger real fast just so we can see everything. Oh, no, and then let's redo that. There we go, that looks better. So this will create a new Jellyfin LXC. Do we want to proceed? Yes. And we are not going to want to use the default settings because there are some customizations we're gonna want to do. First of all, we're gonna want to go ahead and select Ubuntu and select 22.04 seems to work the best, at least on the current version of Proxmox with the current kernel. So let's continue from there. And we are going to make this a privileged container again, so it has access to hardware acceleration. You could do this through Docker on Servarr, but that's not a privileged container, and separating services out like this is my preference. So boom, set our root password and then verify it. Container ID, you could give it whatever ID you want. Just for my own personal organization, I'm going to make this 201, but again, it doesn't matter, it's up to you. Hostname Jellyfin is perfect, and then the disk size. Now this isn't really going to matter except for how big your media library is. You have to think about that. For example, my personal Plex media library, just the configuration folder, I think is about 18 gigabytes, and it's huge. So just to give it a little wiggle room, I'm going to give this 32, continue. CPU cores, it's not too resource intensive. So for me, in this one, 2 should be fine. 2 gigabytes of RAM is probably fine. Again, you can always up these later in your settings. Bridge, DHCP, skip that. Yeah, let's disable IPv6, leave blank for default, blank for host, leave that blank, enable root SSH, let's say no because I just access it through Proxmox, no on verbose, and then let's create it. So then it is going to create, it's going to ask us where we want the actual local disk for this Jellyfin container to be. I'm going to put this in Flash, or again, if you followed the first video, it might be called disks. So let's go ahead and hit continue. So there we go. It's building, it's updating the template list, and it's doing everything that it needs to do. And there we go, it's all done. So now Jellyfin should be reachable at this URL now before. We do that, we want to give it access to that the data virtual hard drive that we have that's going to have all of our movies and TV shows and everything on it. So in our Proxmox node on the shell, we are going to go back to those configurations. So we are going to, again, cat the 100 and then grab this data mount 0.0. Give that a copy, and now we are going to nano into our new Jellyfin configuration, which is going to be the 201. And then from here, just right under net, we are going to paste that in. So now 0.0 is data, so it will see it in that root data folder just like everything else. And you'll notice this one, compared to some of the other ones that we created, has a lot more variables. Most notably right here, dev DRI, this is the actual hardware acceleration or the Intel QuickSync access. So this is going to be able to use that. So let's Control O, output this, and then go ahead and restart this Jellyfin container. So right click, reboot it. And then under resources here, we'll see that mount point for the new, or the data directory, which has our movies, TV shows, and all that fun stuff. So now if I log on into it with the credentials I set up, and then I cd into root, we can see that data folder. So if I cd in there, ls, we can see our movies, music, and shows, downloads, everything that we've been doing for this entire video. But again, remind me of this IP address. This is 60. So I'm going to give that a copy, and I'll use this tab here. The port is 8096. So let's go ahead and paste that in. Going to 8096, and here we are, we're in Jellyfin. So the setup process for Jellyfin is pretty straightforward. We just go ahead and create our account real fast, go next, and now we're going to add our libraries. Now we should have access to that data folder. So the first, we're going to do movies, folder, boom, right there under data, select the movies folder, hit OK. And you can go through, change all these settings to your specific preferences. I'm going to keep everything at default. And then we're going to add another one. This one is going to be our shows. And for the folder, again, it's in data and shows. So click that and continue. So now if I hit next, we have English, United States, boom. Let's enable port mapping, continue, and we're done. Now we go log into our instance. And there we go. We have our one movie and one show that have been added. Now, real quick, just to actually enable that quick sync and test to make sure it's working, we could go over to settings. We want to go to the administration dashboard, and I believe it's under playback. Yep, transcoding. We are going to go with the Intel quick sync right there. We have some options, but I'm not going to go too in depth on all that. Usually, if you don't know what you're doing, defaults are going to be good for now. Gives us a little warning. I got it. The settings have been saved. And now, if you do want to make sure hardware acceleration is working, we could head over to our actual Jellyfin right here. We're already in, and it should automatically have the tool called Intel GPU Top. And there we go. So it detects our actual graphics card right there. And if we do play media with hardware encoding, so let's just play A Bug's Life. Let's mute this right here. We could see if it's using it by just going to playback info. And right here it is direct streaming, so it's not using hardware encoding at the moment. But if I did go ahead and drop the quality down a little bit, so let's say 720 at 6 megabytes a second, we can now see the play method is transcoding. And if we go over to our Proxmox instance, we can see the GPU is in fact working. So yeah, that is now set up. We have all of our media tools for organization. We have the actual media server. And now one thing that I would absolutely love to add to all of this, if I go over here under the Jelly Compose, this right here, you can use this if you want to set up Jellyfin on like a normal Ubuntu server through Docker. You just put this entire stack in and you're good to go. That does have some extra stuff such as Jellystat, which frankly at the moment is untested. So do note that I have not actually tested Jellystat as of yet. But seems to be a good tool with good reviews. I should put a comment in there saying that's untested. But one thing I want to show you guys is Jellyseerr. There's a Plex tool for this called Overseer. It's almost the exact same thing. If I wanted to copy this right here, actually let's just grab the entire thing. I will be doing a separate video on this and some other Jellyfin tools and plugins and stuff that you might consider adding to your whole stack of media stuff. So in here, we're going to go to stacks. I'm going to make a new stack. This one is going to be my Jellyfin my Jellyfin stack, even though I'm not actually going to end up putting Jellyfin in there. So I'm going to, for now, get rid of Jellystat like that, and then I'm going to get rid of Jellyfin since we're not going to be using this Docker container, and then I could always go to the stack and add new containers and tools as I discover them. This one, I haven't customized this yet, so we are going to want to shift this to just be Docker Jellyseerr, and then fix my permissions here real quick. I'll update this stack before I actually put this video out. And this is going to be on 5055, so I should just be able to easily deploy this stack. And there we go, it's right there, our Jellyfin stack. So if I go to this IP and it was 5055 without the HTTPS, this is Jellyseerr. You see it's a fork, use your Plex account. You're going to want to click right here, use your Jellyfin account for this. For the URL, that's 10.0.0.60, and then put in that username and password that you just created. I'm going to drop in my email address, and this needs to be valid, so I'm going to add that, and then the port 8096, sign in, and there we go. So first let's go ahead and sync up our libraries, and let's enable movies and shows. We can start the scan. It's only going to find a couple things. And that scan's done, so I'm going to hit continue. Here you can add your Radarr and Sonarr servers, because what this will do is make it so people can use this application to go through and automatically request things, so then it will show up as requested media on Sonarr and Radarr. Super cool. So then if somebody makes a request, you could see it in your media organization tools, go on Amazon or whatever it may be, order the DVDs, rip them, and then put them on your server. Obviously, of course, depending on your local laws and how the data on those disks is encrypted. So just as an example, if I wanted to add the Sonarr server, you could see it right here. We do default server. This is Sonarr, and it's at 10.0.0.51. We're going to want to grab our API key, drop it on in there, and then we need to run a quick test to make sure the connection's working, which it is. So then it unlocked more settings. So let's say we want 1080p, the root folder, language profile, and test it again, add the server, and there we go. So then you do the same thing with Radarr as well. Let's click Finish Setup, and here we are. So then you could use this tool to actually browse. So if I went to movies, for example, I could see some top trending movies with popularity descending. I could add various filters, including looking at like a specific streaming service, like what's a movie on Hulu, sorted by popularity, and those are my options. So for now, I think we're good. We have most of my media stuff set up. I do have more work to do. For me personally, I'm going to migrate my Plex stuff in here. I'm going to create a new container using the exact same thing we did with Jellyfin, with that helper script under the ID 200, and import all that. So I have some work to do on my end. I'm going to need to put Home Assistant on here, and it's either going to be the next part of this series or maybe one after, where I'm going to add Nginx Reverse Proxy Manager, DNS server for ad blocking, and TwinGate, so I could go ahead and easily connect to this. So I do hope you enjoyed. Everything I mentioned will be down below. I'm sorry this video is so long, but we had a lot to do. So with all that, I do hope you have an absolutely beautiful day, and goodbye.